You're listening to Life with Herpes, and this is episode 56. I am Alexandra Harbushka, and I am host of the podcast Life with Herpes, and I'm really excited to have a guest today. We have a very special guest. Hey, her name is Jenelle Marie Pierce, and she is the executive director and founder of the STD Project. So that is a really big title, and it is. That's a big title, and it's exciting. She's also the spokesperson for PositiveSingles.com. And an STD expert for Answers.com. So she has definitely been around in this sexual health community. She also chairs the Communication Action Group for the National Coalition for Sexual Health. She's also a member of the International Union Against Sexual Transmitted Diseases, the American Sexuality Transmitted Disease Association, the National Viral Hepatitis Roundtable, and the National Coalition of the STD Directors. Her work has been featured on many popular TV, radio, and printed outlets such as the Washington Post, Cosmopolitan Magazine, Jezebel, Forbes, HuffPost, National Public Radio, Mother Jones, Refinery 29, the Daily Mail, Bustle, and many, many more. So I've also learned, just to give you guys a background on Jenelle, she loves working out. She teaches fitness classes. She is an outdoors girl. She skis, hikes, snowshoes, kayaks. Am I missing it? Runs. Likes to run through the sprinklers. That was one of those things. And she has 7 pets. So I bring to you this amazing Jenelle. So welcome, Jenelle.
Oh, what a nice introduction. Thank you. Thanks so much. I will let you in on a little secret. It sounds way more fancy than it is, but the STD Project is just me. So when I quit my job and decided to launch this endeavor and this giant website that everyone thought I was going kind of crazy about, oh, sorry, that's my dog. And one of my pets in the background.
One of the 7.
Yeah, one of the 7. And I was like, well, I'm going to give myself a big title. If I'm going to do this and I'm going to totally uproot my career and upend it and all of my education and just a little bit bonkers. And I'm going to then at least give myself a nice fancy title. So yes, but I do all of those other things, and I'm trying to keep my my feet wet and keep my knowledge continually evolving and growing, as is the sexual health field in general, because every day something new and new information and research and stuff comes out. So that's kind of my role, or at least I see myself that way as an educator. Like, that's my responsibility, to stay on top of new language that we're using, new statistics, all of that.
Yeah, that's awesome, because like you said, keeping your hands in it and knowing, because sex, it's so frustrating because it's something that everybody does. It's something that we've done since the beginning of time. Obviously, it's evolution. There's science behind it. But we've made it this dirty thing. It'd be like saying, don't ever, go to the bathroom again. Like, oh, and that's something we have to do physically for our bodies. Or I'd be like, let's not talk about our elbows anymore. Right? I mean, it's like as silly as that, right?
It's as simple as that. It's just part of being a human, and having that desire to be intimate with someone, and that intimacy can be defined in so many different ways, but oftentimes that includes having a physical relationship. And I totally agree. It's just like baffling. From a logical, analytical perspective, it doesn't make a lot of sense. Like, the majority of people, the vast, vast majority, we're not talking about folks who are selectively and choosing to be asexual, which is just still a small number of people. But the vast majority of people will engage in a sexual relationship with a partner. And so why is this such a taboo subject? Why are we so afraid of it? It's like this, I don't know, antiquated version of social control that doesn't help anyone. And it's baffling. It is. It's baffling.
And the other thing too, so Jenelle, we'll get into this. You have herpes, I have herpes, and we'll get into your story of herpes. But since we're on this, talking about sexually transmitted diseases or infections, I was recently in the conversation with someone about shingles and chickenpox, and it's a cousin virus, right? It's also in the herpes family, and that's fine to socially talk about. It's fine to socially have. I mean, you're in pain. I've never had shingles. I don't know what that's like. I had chickenpox as a kid. I'm sure you did. And it's fine. You would take your kid to another kid's house that had the chickenpox, your kid would get it. Yet because herpes, genital herpes, not even oral herpes, genital herpes is such a stigma that it is shameful, dirty. You're a prostitute, you're a whore, you deserve it. And it's just unbelievable how the same virus can be, it's Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde.
Totally. And exactly, you nailed it right on the head. It's because of how it's acquired, not the actual result of the infection itself. So the infection itself, if not everybody even has symptoms, a lot of people are asymptomatic, and the symptoms are not super pleasant. If you do get outbreaks, there's not really a way to sugarcoat that. Like, they're uncomfortable blisters, but it's not a lot different than cystic acne. It's not a lot different than getting poison ivy during the summertime, which is also highly transmittable to somebody else, and like a pain in the butt. And herpes can be a pain in the butt, quite literally. But anyways, I digress. So it's because of how it's contracted. And so immediately then, and that's, I like to use the analogy of like, we don't shame people when they catch the cold or the flu. We don't say like, which bathroom did you not wash your hands in? Which door handle did you touch? Whose house did you go to that wasn't clean or something, or who sneezed on you? I mean, we're not trying to trace it in the way that we do when we get diagnosed with herpes or any other STD. Like, we want to know who gave it to us and whose fault it is and how it happened. And why didn't we know about this? And why didn't we know that this was a risk? And we just don't think that way in terms of any of these other things that we've already mentioned. So that's what's silly about it. It's like, wait a minute, like, why is that so different? And it's exactly because we live in this culture where everything is sexualized. We sexualize toothpaste and tennis shoes and, things that are totally irrelevant and not sexually related, but we don't actually talk about it. Like, we don't, like you said, I mean, it comes right back to that, where you're just so afraid, even intimately, we don't, because of how pervasive this is throughout our culture, how sex is everywhere and it sells everything and is used in a way in which to sell everything. But we still don't even in the bedroom, our communication is subpar. I mean, if I'm being generous, it's subpar. When you ask people about what they've asked their partners, what they like, what would they like to do, and nobody's had those conversations, let alone when you start talking about safer sex and risk and stuff like that. And so it's a lack of education and just a practical view about something that is just a normal, everyday part of being human and our humanity. I mean, I don't know. Yeah, it's maddening, and it is. It's such a large problem that it can become overwhelming. As like, and I'm sure you felt this way too. The more people reach out to you, you realize how many people are so adversely affected. And it's like, geez, if I could just. This is so, it almost feels like we will never really make that big of a difference. But every time we have these conversations, that in and of itself, it's reaching somebody's listening to this and saying, yes, Eureka, thank you for saying what everybody's thinking,
Exactly. Gosh, we could probably talk for a week on this, because, we're in similar situations. We're dealing with STDs. We're women, I'm assuming in your 30s, I'm in my 30s. We're same generation, and we've been probably paralleling through a lot of this, So Jenelle, why don't you tell me your story? I have so many questions for you, but the day you found out you had herpes, how old were you, and how'd that go?
Oh my gosh, it was awful. I was 16. I had my first outbreak, It was really bad. I was in a lot of pain. It was vaginally for me, or on my vulva is what I should say, not internal. And so on the outside of my genitals, and it wasn't going away. Like, it was a couple of days, and finally I showed my mom, which, like, I hadn't done that before. Mom was pretty open, had showed me how to use a tampon, and we had like a sex conversation. And I mean, I felt pretty comfortable outside of just not really wanting to talk to my mom about sex, and not really wanting to show her this because I was embarrassed and scared. And like, I thought maybe it was something bad, but I didn't know exactly what. And my mom, the first thing she saw it and said, we have to go to the doctor. And she knew in her head. She said later, like, I thought I was pretty sure what you were going to be diagnosed with, but I was just hoping maybe I was wrong. So we went to my general practitioner. I grew up in a small rural town. We had like sheep and horses, and it was pretty conservative of an area out in the country. And this was the same doctor who like treated us for colds and flus and broken arms and whatever. And he took one look at my private parts, my genitals, and on the table, and said, I need to take a swab of this, and didn't say anything. Came back after he had done the swab and said, you have herpes, and this is the worst case that I've ever seen. And here is a prescription, and gave me a prescription for Valtrex. And he didn't provide me with any additional information. Here I am with my mom in the doctor's office, this guy who's got these super thick glasses, half of his ear was missing. He was like bald and old, and like, I couldn't relate to him at all. And obviously he couldn't relate to me or empathize with me. And the one person, of course, you think is going to be empathetic when you are dealing with this, when you get diagnosed, you would think it would be a medical practitioner. And he didn't tell me how common it was. He didn't tell me that things would be all right, or that there were other resources, or how to talk to partners, or how I should go about. I mean, not that the conversation should have been super thorough. Like, he couldn't have possibly touched on every subject or every concern that I had.
Right.
But I just felt as though there was something lacking there in terms of patient bedside care, and just the I don't even know, just some practical information that could have been handed to me, statistics and things like that, to make it. And subsequently, I think that kind of paved the way for how I felt about myself too, because immediately I'm thinking, not only do I have herpes, which is this taboo, stigmatized infection, and I've already heard things as a 16-year-old teenager. I've already heard that only sluts get herpes. And one time I had heard about herpes, it was a friend of mine who lived in a trailer park, and the girl across the street from her had herpes. And my friend had said at the time, she sleeps with everybody in the trailer park. She's a big slut. She's a big whore. So my assumption was that you have to sleep with all these kinds of people, and you have to be a certain kind of person in order to get it. So now I'm getting diagnosed with herpes. And not only do I have it, but I have the worst case that my doctor's ever seen. So not only am I a slut, I'm the worst slut. I'm the dirtiest of dirty, because it's worse than he's ever seen. I mean, it's just, your mind is reeling. And I was so naive. I was so uninformed, entirely uninformed. So I didn't know any better to even I didn't know to stop myself and say, wait a minute, your train of thought isn't actually going to mesh with the reality of your situation. And this doesn't have to be your circumstance, and this doesn't have to be your experience. And so many other people, I just didn't know anything that could have helped me not spiral. And that's exactly what I did. Like, I was just burst in tears. My mom had me go to the car while she paid the doctor at the front desk and stuff like that. And then we went and got my prescription. And I don't remember this part, but mom says, like, I cried the entire way home. All I kept saying was, nobody's ever going to want me again. Nobody's ever going to love me. And she was just like brokenhearted, because she didn't know what to say. I mean, because again, she also didn't have a lot of resources or information or places to turn to and point me to say, no, that's not going to be your case, Jenelle. It'll be all right. And you will find plenty of relationships and all sorts of amazing people and experiences in life, and this won't define you and whatever. But I was 100% certain, like, absolutely nobody would ever want me again. And this is going to affect my entire life, And so yeah, at first it was tough. And even then I told my best friend, and of course my best friend wasn't a very good friend at the time, and she proceeded to tell everybody else. And so it became this giant story and gossip mill. And again, you're a high schooler, and high schoolers can be really cruel. And so couple that with the stigmatized infection, and it just was out of control. And friends made me sleep on the floor at slumber parties because they were worried they were going to contract my herpes from from me if we all slept in the same bed. So the other girls would all be on one bed and I would be on the floor in a sleeping bag. And so it was awful. And yeah, for a long time, I really thought that I deserved it. I truly believed, like you said that earlier, like, you know, you deserve this. I thought that I was being punished by God for being, for having sex outside of marriage and for not, I don't know, being responsible. I had gotten on birth control. I'd gone to Planned Parenthood because I was becoming sexually active. I knew I didn't want an unplanned pregnancy and whatever. So I thought I had done the responsible thing. I thought I had reduced my risk, and I just didn't know how relevant that risk was. I didn't realize that, no, it's not certain kinds of people. Because in my head, in my 16-year-old ignorant head, I was thinking like, no, I'm not sleeping with dirty people. I'm not, you know, sleeping around in a slut, and I'm, you know, whatever my assumptions were in those horrible misconceptions. That's what hindered me from actually knowing what risk was really apparent for me in my circumstances, and how that was actually, it's a risk that everybody faces. Once you become sexually active, the likelihood of you contracting an STI is super high, and the majority of people do. Like, so not herpes, but just any STI, HPV. Over 80% of all people by the age of 50 will have had HPV at some point in their lives. And that's just one infection, right? So there's 30 plus infections out there that you can contract sexually. These are primarily sexually transmitted infections. So these don't include things like the cold that you can get from your partner or whatever. So there are 30 plus infections out there. And if we're talking about just one, HPV, for example, 80% of all people end up contracting HPV. So if that's just one infection, that's not including additionally the percentage of people who contract all of these other infections. So what that says is the vast majority of all people will at some point contract an infection, but most don't know it. We don't talk about it. Some of them heal on their own before we ever even realize we had something. And we're able to still transmit it to other people, and that might not be their experience, but it's just like, man, once you start learning this, it's like, wow, mind blown. Like, why didn't I know this? Why didn't anyone help me? You know, and that's why. So to come, like, really long answer to your question, but to come full circle, that's why I launched the STD Project, because I'm like, I want to help my 16-year-old self. I can't go back in time and truly help my 16-year-old self, but I want to be able to provide the resources that I so desperately needed. So I can tell somebody, like, listen to these numbers. It's just silly that we're overreacting about this. I understand why people do. I understand why you feel the way you do, but it's unnecessary, and we can move forward. And the more information you know, the less you'll feel like it is the end of your world kind of thing. So it's like, man, I just want to be able to hand everybody this information and be like, you'll be okay. I promise. Like, it's so
100%. So do you think it was good that you didn't have Google, or do you think you would have wanted Google at 16?
I totally would have Googled. I totally would have.
You were a Googler.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And it's interesting because there was the internet. Like, I had AOL back in the day. We had a computer. We were one of the first people to have a computer because my dad repaired computers back then. So we had computers, but you didn't use it in the same way. Like, Googling wasn't a thing at that age.
It didn't exist.
Yeah. So it didn't even occur to me to look online. It didn't occur to me to fight that. To even at the time, it didn't occur until I had my own experiences that proved otherwise, that did not add up, that did not reconcile together. What I had been told, the misconceptions and the stigma of how I should be and who I was and how I should look at myself, was not actually matching what was really happening in my life in terms of relationships. Not a single partner, and this is not everyone's experience, but not a single partner that I have ever had ever given a darn about herpes. It didn't limit relationships in terms of friendships and things like that once I realized, like, who some of the good people were. I mean, sometimes there's just crappy people out there. I mean, people do mean things, and it doesn't mean, you know, if it was about herpes, it might have been about something else in terms of that friend and her spreading rumors and stuff like that. So anyhow, it didn't end up impeding anything in my life. And so I was like, wait a minute, this doesn't make sense. If supposedly everybody with herpes, everybody with STDs is this, but I actually don't feel that way about myself, truly. I know I'm not this crap person. I know I'm not trash. I know deep in my heart of hearts that this is not accurate. So why are these two dichotomous ideas still out there, you know? But I didn't know at the time when I was 16 to question that. I didn't have that fortitude, that self-assurance, and that awareness, or even that confidence to say, no, this is all BS. I'm not going to accept that. So it took a long time. I wish there was Google then, but I don't even know if I would have utilized it, if I would have known to or thought to reach out and challenge that.
Well, at 16, also, you have to remember, at 16, our perception is only 16 years. And I even want to take that out. Like, really 10 years, right? Because by the time you're 6, you're still not, you know what's up as like a first grader, but you don't, like, you need to eat food, but you don't have to go to the bathroom, but you don't know really anything with life. So you only have about 10 years of experience. And then our brains aren't even developed to process it.
Right.
Not to mention like you said, the mean girls, the fact of being in high school, and I'm sure your mom, when she realized what it was, you have to also realize that she's of a different generation, and she's processing it in her generation, right? And how do I deal with this with my daughter?
Right.
Right. And how do I, and I'm sure she would have traded places with you if she could, to say, it's, like, I can't imagine Jenelle being 16 years old, and because, the relationship you had at 16, whether it was a great relationship or not, you're still 16. Like that it's only as deep as it can go. You can't possibly have those deep conversations, those because I'm sure did you even tell your partner?
At the time, I didn't have like a boyfriend. I was in between relationships. So I didn't know who it was. And I was too mortified, and I was too afraid of, if I asked the wrong person, like, one, if they even knew themselves, but secondarily, if one person did know and I asked the opposite, if it was them, then now somebody new knows. And so I was like, I didn't know how to handle trying to figure out even where it came from. My mom thinks she knows, but that's just because she didn't like somebody I was seeing at the time. So she wants to blame them.
Of course.
But, I mean, in some ways it's really helpful because it's kind of irrelevant. It doesn't actually matter. And we hyper focus on like where it came from and the blame and stuff like that. But no, at the time I didn't have a partner to tell, because I wasn't actually in a relationship. I was between two people, and I didn't know who it had.
Wow.
Where if for sure it was one person or the other, it was a potential of like basically two people. And so I'll never really know.
Yeah. And I mean, at the end of the day, we may never really know where, unless you were a virgin.
Right. Like no oral sex either before.
Yeah.
Like, you can't have had any kind of sex, like an actual virgin, not just the like no penis and vagina sex, basically.
Right. Does everything else, but not conventional. I mean, there really is no way to tell. However, there are some, you can sometimes narrow it down. And that's the thing, it does go asymptomatic. So I have HSV1 as well. And I've never had an outbreak.
That's interesting.
Yeah. I had my first outbreak and I've never had another one. And so I'm asymptomatic for it. You would never know that I have it.
Right.
And I do. So there's just, I mean, we could go on and on and on about this. And, I mean, again, like you said, when I was listening to you say your perception or what you had heard about people having herpes was the trailer park girl who slept with everybody, the whore. I mean, all of these misconceptions. And like you said so very clearly, when you boil it all down, as soon as you have sex, you're at, I don't even like to use the word risk, because that makes it sound like it's a horrible thing, right? It's like saying as soon as you leave the womb, you're at risk of getting a cold. It's the exact same thing.
That's true.
As soon as you, it's like, in one of my episodes, I say, and the title is, if you have sex, you will get an STD. Like plain and simple. If you don't want one, don't have sex.
Right.
Simple. It's
Yeah.
really simple. But the fact of the matter is, that's not life. You know, what I go on to talk about is that's not life. Don't live life like that. Enjoy life. We're meant to enjoy it. We're meant to enjoy other people, whether it's sexually or not, whether it's walking through the park with somebody and holding hands. You can get HPV that way, right? It's hand to hand. That's not even sexual.
That's true. Yeah. I think too, it's like we forget that just living, it's reframing either the word or the way in which we look at it, or a little bit of both, because just living, there's inherent risk in everything we do. So, but we take calculated risks all the time, and we make a lot of those decisions quickly because we're used to these calculated risks because we talk about them regularly. So for example, like when I went to teach my class this morning, I taught a STEM class, I have to drive 15 minutes down the road. My gym's right around the corner, which is super nice and convenient, but I still hopped in my car instead of walking. And when I hopped in my car, I put my seatbelt on. And when I turned off of my street, I looked in both directions before I made the turn. I also used my turn signal. And these things I wasn't actually actively thinking about. I wasn't saying like, gotta make sure I turn that turn signal on, because this is just something that I do, try and reduce the amount of potential to have something potentially negative happen. But I could do all of those things, right? I could put my seatbelt on, I could use my turn signal, I could look in both directions, and there still could be somebody who turns out without seeing me, or something, a squirrel that jumps out in front of me, or there could be just something that is not the scenario that I would prefer, that ends in, again, something that's not, I guess, not desirable, or there's another word that I like to use too, instead of not desirable, but not preferable. It's not my preference to have to stop and run over an animal. It's not my preference to have something happen to the front of my vehicle. It's not my preference to get in an accident that harms my body in any kind of way. I mean, none of these things are preferable, but some of these are risks that are inherent because I want to go to the gym to teach that class because they pay me to do it. I enjoy doing it. There's a whole lot of rewards that I receive for taking that risk. And the same is true when we're sexually active. So there's all sorts of rewards for having a sexually healthy, a sexual active lifestyle, and enjoying intimacy with a partner that's consensual, of course. And that is in all of the benefits, the scientific, the actual chemical benefits that are happening in your body, the relationship bonds and benefits that are happening. There's all sorts of wonderful things, but we make this big, like, oh no, what if something bad happens when you're having sex? Well, who cares? In some ways, you want the benefit, you want to enjoy the activity. And so everything you do comes with some level of risk, no matter what. And instead of being so freaked out about the potential negative outcomes, I think it's better to understand what these outcomes are, that they are out there, that they may happen. And then at the end of the day, they're really not so awful. Like it's still, again, it's not preferable. Like if I could get rid of herpes, I would. Now, would I, if I wouldn't necessarily take a pill to get rid of herpes if that pill came with a whole lot of extra side effects and a lot of extra risk and stuff like that. I would have to consider that. How much is herpes really bothering me? Not a whole lot. And how much is this, what are the potential side effects and outcomes of trying to get rid of it? If I could just totally get rid of it with just a pill that had no potential side effects, sure I would, because I don't want the outbreaks, and I wouldn't have to take Valtrex. So that's like, what, $15 every month that I'm spending or something on this. But either way, I wouldn't have to think about the risk of my partner. So if that does happen, I will feel some level of guilt. I mean, my husband's totally well aware of all of this risk, and he's listening to this conversation in the background somewhere in the house anyway. I mean, whatever. Yeah, but in the end, it's like, it's still not that big of a deal, and whatever. So I know that these things are out there. I know that there's a potential that they're going to happen. And then what do I do about them if they do? Instead of like, it is the end of the world. This is this big undesirable thing. And it's like, yeah, I don't want another infection, but I'm still going to keep having sex because I really like sex. So, and that doesn't make me anything. There's no term for that because I really enjoy sex. We all really enjoy sex when it's good and healthy, consensual, and la la la. So it's not like, I don't know. I just wish that we could that doom and gloom and accept that that some things are out of our control. There are certain things that we can do, some things to help reduce our risk, to be conscientious and mindful and thoughtful about our bodies. And I think that's all very admirable, and it's a good idea, and we should certainly aim for that. And that should be this general outcome that's kind of what embodies the whole term sexual health, is thinking about our bodies and how they relate to somebody else and what somebody else wants and what we want and need and all of that, this holistic approach. But if we do all those things and we still contract an STD, it's not the end of the world. But that is exactly what our media, our culture wants us to think, is that that's the worst case thing that could absolutely happen to you. I mean, there's a bazillion things. Yeah. And it's like, no, I'd actually rather get an STD than get in a car accident. The likelihood of a car accident causing all sorts of really irreparable damage is way higher than an STI. And like, there's all sorts of other things that contain so much worse potential. I don't know. It's maddening sometimes, like the way in which we think about these things one of these things is not the same. And it should be.
And speaking on the doom and gloom and other STDs or STIs is, I don't know about you, but for me and what I've heard with HPV, which human papillomavirus is what we're talking about, that doesn't have the stigma at all. And I think my perception of it, like you said, 80% of the population has it, is because that was almost a new STD. It wasn't new to us, but the way it was branded, marketed, sold, it was in the early 2000s, the vaccine, this pap smear screening, it wasn't branded as you're dirty if you have it. It was like, you know what, here's the deal. We're all going to get it, so let's just get vaccinated. Opposed to herpes, it was branded and sold as you are a bad person if you have this. Your life is over. You're never going to have sex again. You're a dirty person. All these things, which is so wild how, HPV causes cancer. Herpes doesn't. Herpes doesn't, it can, right. Herpes doesn't do anything at all.
Right. It's a skin condition. Ultimately, herpes is still, again, a non-preferable skin condition. Like, I do not desire herpes. I would prefer it to stay in the one area that it is. It has moved. It was vaginally. That's why I pointed that out, because now I get it on my butt cheeks. I haven't actually had a vulva area in my genitals proper outbreak in years and years and years. So that can't happen. It can kind of move around a little bit when it's below the waist or above the waist too. Like if you have it on your lips, it can also move to your nose, your eyes, your ears, or your nose, your eyes, and mouth. It can move around there, wherever there's mucous membranes. And anyhow, I digress. But so where was I going with that? The HPV thing though, this is what's interesting to me. So I think it's one of those things where it's like it was branded differently, and then people, again, still don't know much. So in this, I think medical practitioners have done a disservice by way of STD stigma when they have addressed HPV. And now I understand where it's coming from and why, but if you tell people that their abnormal pap smear, so like a lot of women have had an abnormal pap smear. That's a really common thing. It's very common to have an abnormal pap smear, which seems like an oxymoron, but they happen frequent enough because 99% of all abnormal pap smears are a result of an HPV infection. So anyone who's had an abnormal pap smear, which in random conversation, like having cocktails with the girls or whatever, like I've heard a bunch of my friends say, oh yeah, I had an abnormal pap smear, no big deal, whatever. I had to go back and get another pap smear 6 months later. More frequent than you would normally have to if you had all normal screening. And that's just, everyone's like, yeah, me too. I had one too a couple of years ago, whatever. And as soon as you tell them that's because you had HPV, oh no, I didn't. I didn't have an STD. No, I didn't. Yeah, you actually did. But the doctor didn't tell you that because they're just going to tell you that it's very normal to have an abnormal pap smear. They're not going to tell you why, because as soon as they tell you that it's a result of HPV, who did I get it from? What do you mean? What's going to happen? And immediately there's this plethora of questions that are not answerable. You don't really know who you got it from, unless, of course, you've only had one partner for any sexual activity whatsoever. I mean, like we talked about a few minutes ago, like it's nearly impossible to pinpoint. A lot of people will try and think they have an idea, and some of their logic will add up and make sense. But then, as soon as you start filling them in with additional information of how things can be asymptomatic and how you can carry it for long periods of time without knowing, how you can have, even if you've been tested for whatever infection you're talking about, even if you had a negative screening, it may not have incubated at that point in time, so you can have an inaccurate negative, like false negative, all of these things that start to make it to where it's like, nope, you don't really know who you got it from. But this is why, though, that the medical field does not want to tell you when you have a pap smear done. They're actually not testing for HPV. They're just testing for abnormal changes on your cervix, abnormal cell changes on your cervix. And if you have abnormal cell changes on your cervix, it's because you have an HPV infection. HPV infection causes abnormal cell changes on the cervix. And most people will clear that HPV infection naturally. The HPV, that's the warts on your fingers and stuff that you get as kids. I used to have it on my fingers and on my toes when I was little.
Of course, me too.
I think all the public pools I spent all the time at or whatever. And I used to live in the inner city before we moved out to the country. So anyhow, but that was no big deal, right? Because that was very common. And then they just go away. I even had some bruising off, but that never really helped a whole lot. And they just one day like slowly went away on their own and whatever. And same will happen with HPV genitally. So for the majority of cases, but the high risk ones can turn into cancer. The low risk ones can be genital warts that last for way longer than you'd want them to. Some people have them for a couple of years at a time. Some people it's only like 6 months or so, but it's still a nice duration of time that's going to impact your sex life in a way that probably, and it's going to require some conversations you probably haven't been having.
Don't want to have.
Like that. Exactly. So not that maybe they would have been a good idea, but nobody's having these conversations. So I get it, so all of a sudden that freaks people out too. But it's funny because it's like HPV, no big deal. But as soon as you say, well, have you ever had an abnormal pap smear? Yeah. Why? Why are you asking that? That's because you got HPV. An STD. And they're like, no, I haven't. I've never had an STD. I've always been tested. I get a pap smear every year. Did you know that your pap smear doesn't test you for STDs at all? You don't get tested for any STDs when you get a pap smear. They're just looking at your cervix. That's it. They just check your cervix out.
Or even how they don't, you say, oh, I want the full STD panel or, do everything. They don't always do herpes.
No, the majority of the time they don't. In a full panel, people are like, oh no, I've been tested for everything. I get that all the time. I've been tested for everything. I was just tested for everything. Did you ask them which infections you were tested for? They tested me for everything. But did you know that when you say everything, that really only means 4 or 5 tests?
Yeah, it's like chlamydia, gonorrhea.
Nope, there are 30 plus STIs out there. You didn't get tested for everything because you can't. There actually aren't tests for those, and the people are like, what?
Yeah.
I know. Immediately is like, what do you mean? I thought I was being responsible. Well, you are. You're not being irresponsible. You're not dumb because you don't know this. There's nothing wrong with you. You're not screwing up your whole life and your sex life, and you're not some slut now because you haven't figured all this out and you don't know this, because nobody does. No, we're not talking about these things. Like, we don't have these conversations because then they breed more questions and more discussion. And most medical practitioners are way overweighted and they have way too many patients to deal with in a certain amount of time than they really have time to be as thorough as they would like to. A lot of people would like to provide more information, but they just simply can't. And because they're overloaded, I mean, there's a lot of factors that go involved. And it's not just the medical field's fault. I mean, there's also amazing medical practitioners out there, right? So anytime I'm saying putting people into groups, it doesn't mean that everybody in that group is crappy either. I mean, there's phenomenal medical practitioners who are thorough, who do provide comprehensive information, who are inclusive. But the majority that I hear more and more every time, because we do all these interviews on the STD Project, and we get so many readers per month, and people continually say, like, my doctor told me that my case was the worst they had ever seen. Like, my experience at 16 years old of my doctor saying this is the worst case I've ever seen, I thought I was an anomaly. I thought that was a unique experience and I was the special little snowflake. And I wish I were in this circumstance, because it's an awful thing to say, because it does not help a patient in any way, shape, or form. It does not provide factual, beneficial information. You can say that, sure, your case feels very severe. You have a large outbreak, because the first outbreak is always the most severe. And before your immune system has a chance to deal with it and whatever, and you're young anyways. And I mean, there was no actual practical information telling me that it was the worst that the person had ever seen. It's just as irrelevant and does me no service. But I've heard this from other people who come to the website, and and regularly. You too? Mm-hmm. See, I mean,
all the time.
What an awful thing. Like, how does that help? Like, on what level, in what way does that provide any sort of useful information? You might as well just sit there and stare at them blankly rather than say that. That would do more good than you saying this awful thing that is not going to help them, that is going to make them hate themselves for no reason. Like, it just, oh my gosh, it makes me angry. You know, so there's those folks. And then there's some of the amazing folks like the people at Planned Parenthood who I finally went to, who are awesome and empathetic. And, you know, I mean, there's some really amazing practitioners out there too. Like, our system is defunct in many ways. It's not just the medical field. It's not just our education system. It's not just our culture and our media. But that's why this problem is so large. It's why it persists in such a way throughout everything, because it is multifaceted. You know, there's not just one Band-Aid answer for it. It's like, we just have to uproot everything and start fresh and come out and be like, yay, herpes, woo!
I know, we have it. It's fine. It's no big deal.
No big deal.
So something that you said that was interesting, and I've had the same experience, is when I've told partners I have herpes, it was no big deal. They wanted to think about it, of course, and let me do my own research and let me sleep on it, which understandable. But I've never had the rejection from it. Now, I would use it as a scapegoat to get out of sleeping with someone. So I used it to my advantage. When I was like, you know, you go on that, you know, you're single, you're in your 20s and it's a free meal, and you get another free meal and you're like, yeah, so he really
you're bored and you just kind of want some attention.
Yeah.
Like, whatever. I know what you mean.
Right.
Yeah.
And then
that's funny, because that's the first time I've heard that, but it totally makes sense. So, and I like it, because that's a new story, a new angle that I had.
Totally.
Like,
I would use it
to get out of relationships, like
to get out of having sex, like having to sleep with someone, or like, and it worked just fine. And with our community here, I'm having a lot of people that are just, they're scared to date. They don't want the rejection anymore. Everyone they've told has rejected them. What advice do you have for that? Because that's really, and every time I get those messages, I read them, my heart sinks, because rejection of any level, whether it's sexual, whether it's, you know, you were the last one picked for Red Rover when you were in kindergarten.
I always was. I sucked at sports. I always was. It was awful. I hated
that stupid instructor.
Game. I know, but I was just never good at that stuff. And I just was like, didn't want to run. It would just, I don't know. I hated that stupid game. I just empathize. I get that. It's interesting, because before I forget though, what you just said is like profound in its own way, because you said, you know, you used it as a way to get out of sex. And this speaks volumes to other related issues when we're talking about sex and culture, and why STIs and having herpes and talking to partners is so scary too, because to me that says that it's not so easy. And that might sound like somebody who's just listening without having had this experience themselves, but I have, so I know where you're going with that. That's why I understand what you're saying. But someone might say, well, that's a really callous or weird thing. Why can't you just say no? Or why can't you just say, I'm not interested? But that's not taken very well a lot of times. And the masculinity in our culture means, or, you know, in this whole, like, be an extrovert for extrovert's sake, and push yourself on people and assert yourself and lean in, means that it's not so easy to say I'm not interested in a way that you don't get this giant pushback, you don't have this big fight, it's not awkward. Like, talking about that in and of itself is also why this lead into the rest of the sexual health conversation and STIs and stuff like that and safer sex is very complicated, and isn't there's not just an easy just talk to your partner kind of thing, you know. And I read this a lot, and in some ways we've even said these kinds of things, like talking to a partner before putting them at risk is the most ethical thing to do and whatever. but I also get why not everybody has done that. And because in the past, I didn't always do that well either. I didn't always disclose before engaging in sexual activities and putting somebody at risk. And I was unethical, and I did put people's sexual health up for a gamble. And, you know, I just didn't always handle things well because of the scenario, because of these things that are all related, that are all interlaced, right? So, but when we're thinking about that, like, again, it's easier said than done no matter what, right? So talking about it is so much easier, and saying, yep, I'm going to do this. I'm going to talk to my next partner about this, or I'm going to disclose before or whatever. It's so much easier than the actual conversation itself. But I think when we're talking about rejection, we have to look at it in a way that, like, people get rejected for any number of reasons. And you never know. Usually especially when it's dating, you don't know why. So, like, even the person who ultimately you were rejecting, which is kind of cute, cute and sad, because it's our culture that made you feel like that you wanted to do it that way, that was an easier way to get out than just saying I'm not interested, right? Mm-hmm. Because it's our like media and stuff like that, and all these stupid movies about, it's so harrowing when that person just keeps pushing and pushing and pushing and won't. And I read this cute analogy, like, it's only hot when the person is Matthew McConaughey trying at your door, like, not going away, not taking no for an answer.
Right.
But in reality, like, if you really don't want that person, and it's not Brad Pitt or Matthew McConaughey, you want him to take no for an answer. And so, you know, even these love stories and stuff are telling people to no, just keep pushing yourself. Sorry, my dogs are in the background. So anyway, I digress. So when we're talking about that in terms of trying to disclose and thinking about rejection, people do get rejected for any number of reasons. But even those people who you were like, oh, you know, I can't because I have a herpes or something, you know, however you said it, they didn't actually know why you weren't interested. You probably never told them, right? Because that wasn't going to be an easy conversation, and nobody does. Nobody lists off the many reasons why they're really just not interested. They just either start ghosting the person, or they just kind of whatever. Like, I don't know. They do whatever it is that people do, whatever they do to kind of share that they're not interested. They stop talking to you, whatever. And you never get to know why, though. They never tell you, like, you're just not hot enough, your boobs aren't big enough, you weren't good in bed, you don't make enough money, you're too dirty, like, you're actually, like, truly dirty, like your house is dirty, you know? Like,
like literally dirty, not
like right, not sexually dirty, because there's no such thing. But I mean, unless you're actually having sex in the mud, which is then that'd be sexually dirty, I guess. But anyway, so you don't get to know, right? So when somebody says, if you do disclose to somebody and then they reject you, which rejection hurts across the board no matter what. But if they decide that they're not interested at that time, which means that they're not willing to consider that risk, it's just they're not ready for that, because that is a risk that they have to consider. But my partners will tell you, all of my past partners will tell you, that's not something that's constantly in their mind. They're not considering it every time we engage in activities. They don't really think about it ever at all, unless I have an outbreak and we're talking about it, or something like that, or they're just hearing me talk about it now because I'm like the STD lady or whatever with the STD Project. But either way, you actually get to know that they're choosing, that they're not interested in you at this point. They're not interested in considering that just based on a health issue, and that's understandable, and that is their right to decide that that's just not where they want to go at that point. But it has really nothing to do with you being hot enough or making enough money or smart enough or any of those other things that might run through your mind. So in some ways it's nice because, you know, it's simple, and it's just a good way to weed out people. Like, then that person isn't meant for you. Like, I don't, you know, it's kind of simple, but it still feels crappy, right? Because if you're super interested in somebody and they just decide that they're not going to be cool with it because of your infection, then it's heartbreaking. And you think, man, if I could go back 6 months, 2 years ago before you got diagnosed and have met them then, and everything would be different, and, you know, whatever. But
maybe I hate the cliche. Have, maybe it wouldn't have.
Exactly.
You just don't know. You would never know.
You would never know. And it also, like, and you've learned something. Like, every new experience helps your perspective to change. And, like, you want that. You want those new experiences. You want that growth. You want that development. And that helps you to view things in a whole larger, not a 16-year-old's mind of an only small world, you know, and that's why. So, and I think that, yes, like, we have steps and stuff that we talk about on the STD Project, like ways in which you can have this conversation. And And I guess just in case people are wondering, like we always talk about being kind of as simple about it as possible, trying to be as the least emotional as you can. Like if your natural response is to shed some tears and stuff like that, you can't help that. Like don't like poke it in and look like a crazy person trying your best to pretend like you're not emotional about it. Because my first couple of disclosures I was a hot mess. I was like blubbery and crying all over the place.
You're a teenager.
Yeah, I mean, I had no idea, and I was petrified, and whatever. But that does change over time, and even so, though, like if you make it this big giant deal, the other person is more likely to perceive it that way as well. When it's more or less something to consider, it does impact your life in a way, but it doesn't have to be that giant of a deal. And I think you can also you can open it up. It's not always about just you, right? So the people, when you get diagnosed, you're like, how am I going to talk and tell somebody this? How am I going to disclose this? Because that's going to be a big deal breaker for them. But you're still learning about them too. They might have deal breakers for you further down the line, or that might open up, it's going to build intimacy no matter what, in terms of that now you're willing to talk about something that is sensitive and personal to you. You may learn something new and unique about them. They may feel more close to you. And I mean, it may be a really positive kind of thing. So, and I think it's okay to acknowledge that this is awkward as all hell. Like I don't know how to have this conversation. Like we don't talk about these things, and I just don't even know. And so it feels weird, but I just need to tell you this. So here it is, kind of thing. And like, and sorry, that was weird, or, I mean, whatever, like not necessarily apologizing for yourself, because that's a part of our culture too, but just being true to however you're feeling and acknowledging that. And it's okay to be like, this is weird. Like, this is just, I don't know what to say, but this is something I want to talk about. And so here I go, and then, and then I just think we forget that we're not the monsters that everyone has to avoid, because also too, when you have one STI, you're at a higher risk of contracting additional STIs, or so the statistics say. And don't you care also about your sexual health? And like, they may never have been tested, so they may have something. And the likelihood, if they're sexually active, is high that they do, and or have in the past. Like, and maybe there's additional conversations that you're interested in having about what you like out of the relationship, or what you're interested. Are you interested in trying something fun? Like, I don't know. What do you care about? And I mean, it can be more organic, less scary. And at the end of the day, though, I guess the short thing is it's going to be scary no matter what. There's no real way to make it not scary. You have to just go in it knowing that this sucks. This is not what I would like to be having or doing, but you're going to learn something from it. And everything that scares you, you learn something from.
Yeah, and
you gain something from it.
It's a part of being an adult. And if it wasn't scary, if there wasn't risk, if you didn't have skin in the game, then you wouldn't have the pleasure. You wouldn't have the benefit. You wouldn't have, the fact when people say, oh, well, those conversations suck, I don't want to have it, then you shouldn't be having sex. Because there's no way you can physically, emotionally, spiritually, whatever, open up to that person and enjoy the benefit of sex. Like on the different dimensions that occur through sex, right? And through if you don't feel safe with that partner, it's not going to be fun. It's going to be like, you're going to be like starfish.
Right.
Literally.
Right. Like a bodysuit, a rubber bodysuit. And seriously. Well, and it's cute too, because I hear this a lot. And I just was reading through an interview that was submitted the other day. And somebody was like, I just wish I could go back, because I can't be as free anymore. And I just feel like I can't be as young and free. And they were talking about with sex and being able to hook up and not have to worry about it. And then I thought, really what that says to me though is ignorance is bliss, right? What they're really saying is, I would prefer to be ignorant, because now I have knowledge and I realize what my real risks are. So I have to think about that, and I can't just go into it and just bang whoever and not have to think about it after the fact. But really, it's like you were putting yourself at risk before. Even being free, quote unquote, is still risking yourself, because the likelihood that somebody has an infection is super, super high. 1 in 2, 50% of all people contract an STI by the age of 25. That's super young, right? So 50% of the up 25-year-olds, I'm 35 now. So now that number is doubled. Like 75% of the people I know have had an infection, which holds true to all the people who I talk to online, friends and family and stuff like that. And everyone's like, oh my gosh, like, and I'm sure you get the same thing. Like, yep, and you hear stories all the time. It's like, why? Everybody thinks they don't know anyone. Yeah. Why are we doing this to ourselves?
Yeah. That's a funny one too. When I tell people this is my podcast and this is my, this is what I do. It's Life with Herpes. And people are like, well, I don't know anyone with herpes. And I giggle because I know they do, because our friends have told me that they have it, and like it's like their friend, like their best friend, and I'm like, hey.
I'm like, yeah, you actually probably do, and they think the same thing, like they don't know anybody either, and like it's it's maddening. It's like we're hurting ourselves in this way, Totally. I mean, it's just. And that's the same thing with it's like with the risk, and I just want to be able to hook up and not have to worry. Well, you should have been worrying in some way, shape, or form. I mean, I don't care if you don't worry, but because I think that I try my best not to use the word should. My idea is in empowering people with the knowledge and the information, and then they decide what they should and shouldn't do after they have that knowledge and information. Like, I don't care if you know everything about STIs and then you want to hook up with 20 people in one night and you don't want to use protection with any of them. Like, that is your prerogative. Rock that out. As long as you are educated and you know the risks so that you're not freaked out when something happens, when and if something happens later, then that's your choice and your body. And as long as it's consensual, of course, with these 20 other people, like, I don't care. I mean, I'm not making a judgment about that. Like, rock it out. If you can find 20 people in one night to hook up with, like, I'm kind of impressed anyways. And if you have all that energy, like, man, I teach one spin class and I'm dead. So, I mean, whatever.
That's a good point. The stamina.
Right. Exactly. I mean, it's not up to me to decide that, but the problem is that nobody knows, so they're like, man, it was so much better when I could just hook up and I didn't have to have these conversations. Well, it would be
you were still having it.
These risks were still there regardless. So you were putting your body at risk and not even knowing it. And in some ways it's like, shame on the people who didn't help you and tell you and teach you, and where are the resources, and why isn't this a little more relevant
or
having these conversations?
To go back to one of the things you said in the beginning, I think you said you had a definition of who had herpes. Like, I don't sleep with those people. That's always my favorite. That's my favorite quote. Like, I remember, because I went back and called people I'd slept with like in 3 years or something. Like, I went way back just because I felt if I didn't say something, if someone would have made the phone call to one of the people I slept with, then I wouldn't have it. Right. Like, or I would have been able to make the choice, is how I looked at it. So now I forgot what I was going to say. Oh, when people say, oh, well, I don't sleep with people like that, or I don't sleep with dirty people, or it's like, so am I dirty? Do I look dirty to you? Because I have herpes now and you slept with me. So am I now like that person?
Now I'm what? Yeah. Like what does that mean?
That's my favorite one. That's like my favorite, right?
Yeah. Like, all these little those people. Oh yeah. And I even thought that myself at 16. I was like, well, that's not who I'm sleeping with. I know this stuff. Like, no, you don't actually know. You don't, because most people don't, most people have no idea, and they have no idea they're carrying it. They have no idea they're transmitting it. They have no idea any of it. We just aren't discussing in any sort of way that's thoughtful and practical and helpful for people.
No, not at all.
And it just breaks your heart. It can be maddening, but I mean, it's good to have these conversations, because somebody's going to listen to this and they're going to be like, oh, that's interesting. And my intention is not to change behavior. I actually don't care if anybody ever uses a condom, because right now most people aren't using condoms regularly, consistently, or correctly. Like, I just don't care, as long as you know what the real relevant risk is, how many people have STIs. And I don't think that necessarily should change your perspective on whether you want to use a condom. That's not up to me to decide how you feel about that. I just want to provide the information so that when and if it happens, something happens to you that's still not preferable, but it's probably likely if you're sexually active, that you don't go into a tailspin, that you don't like lose yourself for years like I did, and let that define you, this stigma and this misinformation. And so that you can make decisions that are good for you.
I like what you just said. Use it correct. First of all, use a condom correctly. There's so many times people don't use it correctly, right?
Oh, no.
I mean, and that sounds really obvious, but it's not.
Mm-hmm.
And I know people are listening like, well, I use it correctly all the time. No, you know,
probably not. Are you using lube with your condom? Are you putting a drop on the inside and a whole lot on the outside?
All the stuff. No,
probably
no.
not. And even if you use a condom, you could use a condom every single time. You could use a dental dam every single time you have oral sex. You could get tested before and after each new partner. You could not use substances when you're engaging in sexual activities and partnered activities. You could do all of these things that help reduce risk, and then you still could get an STD. You still could get herpes, of all things, heaven forbid. You know, and people do. I get that conversation a lot too of like, I've always used a condom. I can't believe this.
Yeah.
Well, condoms don't cover everything. You know, so let's talk about anatomy, and we'll go backwards a little bit.
Foreplay. Did you use a condom during foreplay?
Probably not.
Probably not.
Oral sex. I don't know. Maybe not. Mostly not.
No.
You know, most people aren't using it for oral sex. Then people get HSV1 genitally because somebody went down on them, and then they're freaked out too. Well, I was saving myself for marriage. Well, you were still having oral sex. That's sex. Like, I mean, oh my goodness. I know. It's just, and I get it. I get all of this because I was there. I wasn't in everyone's shoes, and I wasn't everywhere, and I don't ever 100% understand all perspectives, but I do get the progression. I get where there's this lack of information. I get why people are thinking like, oh, okay, I did the same thing. Like I was just going to not have penis and vagina sex. So I did oral sex and some other stuff for a while, and thought like, oh, I'm still saving myself for marriage. Yay, Jesus, you know, and whatever. Well, that's still sex. So like, I get this kind of train of thought and stuff. So in some ways I'm laughing at it because I realize like how unhelpful that was to me once I became sexually active, how that limited my ability to make decisions that were good for me and my body. And I still may have ended up with herpes at the end, but at least then I would have gotten it, and I wouldn't have been so shocked and so scared and so petrified and feeling as though nobody would ever love me again. I think that would have changed that. Yeah. I wouldn't have hated myself, because I think I did for a little bit too. I blamed myself. I felt like I was being punished, like this was karma and God and all of the things, the universe slapping me on the hand and whatever. And I think that would have changed a little bit. I may still have been really frustrated and disappointed and bummed and wish that didn't happen. Just like when I catch the flu and I'm stuck puking over my toilet and it's coming out of both ends at once because I have this awful virus. I mean, I still don't like that either. I'm not thrilled about it. I'm still like, man, I hate being sick. This is miserable. And I'm like the worst sick person ever. But I'm not, I don't hate me,
Right.
and I'm not putting other people at risk.
That's a huge difference.
So I would just, if we can help people to feel differently about themselves when these things happen, I don't know. It's not my job to change behavior. And I think actually, naturally, if we approach it in the way that our intention is not to change behavior, but that's not our goal. Our goal is to help people to feel differently about themselves, to provide them with that information. Naturally, behavior will just change inherently because of the empowered information. I mean, actually, studies have been done that say when kids are exposed, young adults are exposed to comprehensive and inclusive sexual health education, their behaviors do change. They choose to engage in sexual activities at a later age to begin being sexually active at a later age, and they are more often using safer sex practices. And that's without telling them what they should be doing and shouldn't be doing. That's just with providing education and information.
Interesting.
So that's my thought process too. Not that I always do it right, like I'm learning as well. I'm trying to use different language and as we evolve,
me too.
And whatever, it is. And it's kind of fun. I mean, it's a cool process watching all that happen.
Yeah. I mean, I'm sure you evolved. I evolved tremendously through this. And, it's really a gift that we can share it.
I agree.
Well, thank you, Jenelle. This has been so much fun for me. I'm sure for our listeners and you, and it's just fun to talk to someone else who has herpes.
Who gets it? Yes.
Who gets it and is changing the world with it. And is using it as not a scarlet letter, but using it as wearing that scarlet letter with pride, I guess. I don't know if that's even a right thing to say, but just saying, you know what, I have this, fuck it. And let's just, it doesn't even impact my life at all. I have to make little changes here and there. But you know, so does having a cold. So does.
I like in what we're doing, you know, it's interesting you said with pride, because I was thinking of this earlier and then I went off subject and thought about something different and forgot about it. But I actually liken what we're doing to a lot of the LGBT work and movement. So if we think back like 20 years ago, if you would have asked somebody on the street if they knew somebody who identified as lesbian, gay, transgender, they would have been like, no, I don't know anybody. And there was a lot of this misconception, and there was a lot of this stereotyping these groups of people and saying like, oh, these people are this, because it was easy to do because you didn't know anybody. So you could propose this judgment and you could stamp it on a group of people without having to have any responsibility. But as soon as more and more people started coming out, just like we're coming out with herpes, right? We're coming out in a different way. As soon as people started coming out, all of a sudden, now you talk to somebody and you say, do you know anybody who's lesbian, gay, transgender, bi, whatever? Like, everyone's going to say, yeah, I know someone, my best friend, my uncle, my cousin, whoever it is, somebody you care about and love and respect, right? So it's we can no longer then categorize and stereotype a large group of people when all of a sudden in that group of people includes people we love and care about and respect and whatever. And I think the same holds true for STIs. Like, we have to keep doing this work. We need more people like you, like myself, like all of the others, but there are a few of us still. I mean, in terms of real sheer numbers and the reality of how many people are out there, the more we share this, the more it's going to be a lot more difficult to say like, oh, herpes is dirty and whatever, because all of a sudden that's like, wait a minute, no, that's my best friend. She's not dirty. That's my mom, you know, that's my so-and-so. And immediately
my husband, my wife,
Exactly.
Yeah.
But right now, because nobody knows that everybody they know has it, you know, it's like, oh, so we're getting there. I mean, it's cool too, because I just met you recently, you know, and it's like, there's more of us. There's more of us that is doing this work, and I'm so glad about it. Because I think the more we do that and the more we network and connect with things, like the more that inspires other people to keep up.
Totally. I love it. I know. I love it. I got so excited to talk to you today.
Yay.
Well, thank you, Jenelle. This has been wonderful. Those of you that are listening, check it out. It is the STDproject.com. She's also a fellow podcaster. It's on pause right now though, right?
Yes.
But go back and listen, and find Jenelle, check it out. She is amazing. And there's a lot of fun stuff. I spent a lot of time on there, in the last day, obviously preparing for this interview today, but you have a ton of great stuff on there, and I really enjoyed reading through it. And just so go check it out. And thank you. I really enjoyed this. Thank you.
Likewise. It's been my pleasure.
Me too.
Anytime.